'cause the wind on my cheek feels like you. You know I love autumn, because in autumn I'm not the only one who feels a little lonely. You know I love autumn, because it turns from chilly to warm and then back to cold again. You know I love autumn, because the fading light makes the world so gentle. Because the sound of leaves falling is softer than silence. You know I love autumn, because the night comes early and the stars come closer. You know I love autumn, because the coffee tastes sweeter in the cold air. Because the air is crisp and it feels like a secret hug. Because it makes me remember and forget at the same time. You know I love autumn, because every breath feels deeper, slower, calmer. You know I love autumn, because the streets are empty, but I don't feel alone. You know I love autumn, because the stillness whispers to me, you're safe, you're safe. You know I like the night more than the day. You know I like when the street is empty. You know I love the sound of my own footsteps. You know I stop just to look at the small lights in windows. You know I love the sky when it hides the stars. You know I feel safe when the world is quiet. You know I like to walk slow and pretend I'm not alone. You know I talk to myself in whispers and wait. For no answer. Ooh.
I wanna walk slowly on weekends, just listening to the quiet streets. You know, I wanna drink warm coffee on weekends, holding the cup with both hands. You know, I wanna stay in bed on weekends, with the blanket soft around me. You know, I wanna read a book on weekends, letting the pages turn like whispers. You know, I wanna listen to the rain on weekends, every drop like a heartbeat. You know, I wanna light a candle on weekends and let the flame breathe softly. You know, I wanna watch the sky on weekends, changing its colors like a dream. But you know, in the end, being with you feels warmer. Being with you feels softer. Being with you feels better than any weekend dream. To leave my coffee half finished. You know, I carry my bag with the zipper open. You know, I walk too fast even when I'm not late. You know, I listen to the same song again and again.
You know, I love the smell of laundry more than perfume. You know, I open the fridge just to look inside. You know, I stay under the blanket too long on weekends. You know, I keep notes I never send to anyone.
You know, I forget my keys sometimes and laugh at myself. You know, I stare at the ceiling, pretending I'm thinking deeply. You know, I like the sound of typing even more than the words I write. You know, I leave the light on even when I don't need it. You know, I like to imagine conversations that never happen.
You know, I notice the way people smile, even strangers passing by. You know, I think too much about little things nobody else sees. You know, I love the silence after rain, soft and safe. You know, I check my phone even when I expect nothing new.
You know, I hold my cup with both hands just to feel the warmth. You know, I like to take the long way home for no reason at all. You know, I always notice the little things and keep them like secrets. always like you. You know I always notice you. You know I always keep these thoughts softly, softly, only for you. Only for you.
You know I take the long way home. You know I walk past the same corner every night. You know I look at the shop windows even when they're closed. You know I count the street lamps one by one. You know I like the sound of cars far away. You know I like the smell of food on the street. You know I walk slow when the air feels warm. You know I walk fast when I think of you. You know I always take the long way home. Because maybe, just maybe, I'll see you there. You know I listen to my own footsteps just to feel I'm not alone. You know I look up at the apartments wondering who is awake. You know I wait at the crosswalk even when no cars are near. You know I trace the cracks in the sidewalk with my eyes. You know I love the glow of neon signs fading in the distance. You know I hear laughter from strangers and it feels like a story I missed. You know I pause under the streetlight pretending the night is longer. You know I keep walking because I don't want it to end too soon. You know the long way home is never empty. You know the long way home is always waiting. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be there at the end.